A lot of people won't know you, as Magella said there, you played a very quiet background role in the peace process. So just talk to us a little bit, first of all, about yourself, about your family, about your growing up, and how you became involved in those early stages in the 1970s.
Well, I grew up on a very mixed terrace street, and I was born in 1936 and 73, and I had two grandmothers. One was my grandmother, who looked after me as my mum and father were waiter and waitresses. They were out working in army camps, and Americans really they worked with. And across the street was my second grandmother, who was a Mrs. Sinclair. And the Sinklers were one of those Protestant families that were the heart and soul, literally, of goodness. And Mrs. Sinclair used to, the Sinclair family was the family that had four of their brothers killed in World War I. And the fifth was sent back by the British Crown at that time. And he was called Dick. And Dick fathered the last boy, who was Andy. And Andy was totally spoiled and ruined. And Andy and I were pals. Whenever Andy wanted anything, he lay down in the hall with a pair of hobnail boots and banged until they gave him sixpence or a shilling, whatever it was. As well as that, they had motorbikes, and they also were shooters. They hunted down an inch of the border. And bottom line, in my early days, the Archie gave me a gun, .22 rifle, and I used to run across the countryside with this rifle, because at that time of the Geronimo pictures. And so that was one aspect. I then went to St. Colum's College, in which I had a horrendous time. And down the street from us was John Hume. John and I were pals in those early days. I was 6 months older than him. And bottom line, John had a lovely career in the college, and I had a terrible career. I think I was thrown out 5 or 6 times. And I've often looked back at this stage in my life and say, well, they couldn't have been all wrong. But I can't find, I just don't know what I was doing that created such animosity. And the other thing I did in those days, I was a runner. I ran every day, possibly 6 or 7 miles a day. I ran, in fact, at the time that you come back and formed, didn't form actually, was part of the Oakleaf Athletic Club, which was the National Cycling Association of Ireland, and that was my first indication of Irish nationalism. I then, like everybody else in that part of the world, had no job, went over to England, and went over with a pretty hostile attitude towards the English. And I was putting the little knobs on Bush television sets, earning £11 a week and sending them 6 or 7 back to Margot, my wife. And I remember clearly the guy, an Englishman, saying, okay, we're coming into winter time and we're going to do overtime. And I remember sitting saying, I'll be the last person that gets an opportunity to get over here. And the next thing I heard was, alphabetical order, Duddy, you're first. And it was as startling as that.
The British had surprised you already.
Absolutely, it surprised me already. And from that piece, I began to learn that the British people and the British establishment were not necessarily the same group. So came back, married Margot, and my father was dying at 47 years of age with cancer, opened a little fish and chip shop about the size of this here.
Your father did, yeah?
No, my father did. No, he did it, and I worked on it, and I was not a very good work person. Whenever I threw the head out. And then eventually, I got an opportunity of a site in the Craig Estate, which was a concrete block, and went up there And that became, as was said, a political salon. Great deal of the people, Hume again, Mallet again, official IRA people basically were there at that time, and we used to sit before in the morning, and it was all the time political talk.
But Nell McCafferty, Eamon McCann.
Nell McCafferty, McCann came later, he was younger, and Brendan Duddy came later, she was the same year as McCann. But basically it was, and may I just say, Jack Ellens, who turned up as Secretary of the Unionist Party, Ivan Cooper. So it was that type of place. And the interesting thing from a broader perspective is that there was nobody drinking, at least that's what it appeared to be. And life seemed to be quite a different place. And there was certainly no violence within the community. And then the civil rights movement came up. And this is the first controversial thing I'll say. McCann, Dermot McLennan, and various other people of that left persuasion got together, came into the City Hotel, and John Hume came down there. And why I'm saying that was, we're now talking about a period of 4 or 5 months, so I don't want to get it wrong. But basically, the church at that stage decided that this thing could not be left to those people on the street, basically. And I don't mean rioters on the street, I mean the McCanns, the Swartz and so forth. And then Eamon, who's been a friend of mine for all his life, he did what Eamon does. He gets up and makes a speech and says, I'm not taking part of this, middle of the road, middle of this, and middle of everything. So he opts out, and that was the first civil rights in Derry that moved up on that.
You mentioned the church there, and I remember something you said to me some time back, that some of the saddest days in your life,
The saddest day,
yeah, was being turned away from church doors. What did you mean by that?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't be sitting here saying I'm a wonderful Catholic or a Christian. I am not. I go to Mass when the Spirit moves me. But throughout all the work I was doing, I had a belief basically in the Spirit, in God, in the Absolute. And I had that belief in terms of basically saying, I need help the day, give it to me if you're asking for it. And as a result of that, and I won't mention individual clergy people, but when the process began to move forward, I was down in a parochial house and I said to the bishop, I said, look, and I looked out the window and there was little snowdrops coming up. I said, there is movement and peace in this country. And this is a very honourable man. And he said, well, if the provisionals are involved in it, I'll denounce it from that pulpit. And I said, but that's crazy. And the man was so steeped in his antagonism and in his propaganda system against Republican thinking that he just could not cope with the possibility that the change would come.
So what was the mindset? Did you condemn an end to this rather than try to negotiate an end to it? At that very early stage when we're still...
I'll come back on that if you ask me later.
Okay.
And I keep repeating, John's a good colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, and I love him dearly. But whatever your thoughts are, he's a very honourable man.